The evening light fell like soft gold on the small frontier town. Dust drifted in slow swirls along the main street. A bell somewhere far off gave one gentle ring, then settled. Dogs dozed on warm steps. A few people finished their business at the general store, counting coins, tying parcels with string, and making quiet plans for the morning. Near the end of the road, where the houses grew thin and the open prairie began, a young Apache girl sat on a smooth, flat rock with her small bundle beside her. Her name was Nayeli. She kept her back straight, even though she felt tired deep in her bones. She had walked many places. She had waited in many doorways. She had learned to keep her voice even when her heart grew heavy. She had come to the town earlier that day after a long stretch on a wagon trail, riding part of the way with a family who let her sit on their tailgate and share a cup of water. They had been kind but hurried, and when they turned north, she stepped down with a small nod and watched them roll away. Now the sun dropped lower, and a soft chill began to move in the air. She pulled her shawl closer and watched the last few shoppers hurry home. Nayeli did not like to ask for favors. She offered to sweep floors, carry water, feed hens, or mend a loose hem. Sometimes people took the help and paid her a little. Other times they said they had nothing for her today. A few smiled kindly but still said no. She never argued. She would just thank them, wish them a good day, and move on to the next place. She told herself that even a small step forward was still a step. At the general store, a woman with kind eyes and a neat bun had noticed her. Mrs. Parker, who kept a stack of ledgers under the counter and a jar of peppermint sticks by the register. "You look like you'd enjoy a slice of bread," the woman said gently, and without waiting for an answer, she wrapped a piece of fresh loaf and slipped in a small square of butter. "Come back in the morning," she added. "There may be kindling to stack." Nayeli thanked her, and for a brief moment she felt lighter. She wanted to believe there was a place for her here, that she could trade steady work for a roof and a warm meal, that someone would trust her enough to give her a key or a task that mattered. But as the last light slid across the floorboards, two men at the counter spoke in low voices and glanced her way. Their words were quiet, not sharp, but they carried a message she had heard before in many places. She understood it without needing to hear more. People liked the idea of helping, but they worried about the unknown. She was young, she was new, and she carried a past that few asked about, even fewer understood. An hour later, she stepped outside into the cooler air, holding the wrapped bread in both hands. She sat on the rock at the edge of town and stared toward the long road. She let the words slip out barely above a whisper, because sometimes a small truth feels lighter if you say it out loud. "No man wants me," she said. She did not mean it as a complaint. It was simply the shape of her life. She had tried many times to find a place to stay and a person to call family. Each time the chance had faded. Each time she moved on with quiet dignity. Across the street, a tall man paused near the hitching post. He was tying a short, neat knot in a lead rope and checking the shoes on his horse. He had the sort of stillness that made animals trust him. His name was Samuel Hayes. He kept a ranch south of town, past the creek and beyond a low line of cottonwoods. People said he was a good neighbor, the kind who repaired a fence without being asked and always returned borrowed tools clean. He spoke softly and measured his words. He had known loss in his life, though he rarely mentioned it. Those who knew him understood he had learned to set one foot in front of the other and keep going, as steady as the seasons. Samuel had heard the gentle murmur from the store, the rustle of paper, the creak of the door, the soft step of a girl crossing the porch. He had also heard that small line carried on the evening air, "No man wants me." It touched something inside him, not as a shock, but as a quiet echo. He had once felt very alone, too. He remembered evenings when the house felt too large for one person, and the clock sounded too loud. He remembered learning that work could fill hours, but it could not always fill a heart. He did not approach her right away. Instead, he stood for a time, considering. He watched as she broke the bread into small pieces and ate slowly, saving some for later. He noticed the careful way she folded the paper again, not wasting it. He saw the little bundle at her side tied with a bit of cotton string, and thought of how much, or rather how little, a person could carry. Then he noticed something else, a boy's hat rolling down the street pushed by a sudden breeze. The hat tumbled end over end, and the boy gasped as it slipped away from him. Nayeli rose quick and graceful and jogged after it. She reached it just before it fell into a shallow puddle, dusted it with her hand and returned it to the child with a small smile. The boy grinned and ran back to his mother. The gesture was simple, but Samuel saw it fully. He saw a person who still chose kindness even when she had little to spare. As twilight deepened, the town began to close its eyes for the night. Lamps flickered on behind windows. A piano in a far room tried a few notes, then fell quiet. Mrs. Parker stepped outside to sweep the porch and gave Nayeli a nod that felt like a gentle blessing. "We'll see about that kindling in the morning," she said, and locked the door. Nayeli thanked her and moved to the small space near the chapel where travelers sometimes rested. It was a spot sheltered from the wind by a low wall. She sat and unrolled her blanket, then laid her shawl beneath her head, making a pillow as best she could. Samuel walked his horse to the water trough and let it drink. He could have left. He could have told himself that it was not his business. He could have counted all the reasons to look away. But the truth in that light voice, "No man wants me," kept ringing in his heart. He thought of an empty room in his house where the morning sun fell in a bright square on the floor. He thought of a spare saddle that no one used. He thought of the quiet joy a person feels when a second plate sits across from them at supper. He did not rush. He preferred to act with care, not impulse. He led his horse back, checked the cinch, and swung up into the saddle. Then he looked once more toward the chapel corner. He could see the soft shape of the girl settling in, folding her hands, tilting her face to the stars. The night was clear. The sky opened wide above the town, a vast dark field where starlight rested like dew. He tipped his hat and rode south toward the ranch, the horse's steps steady and light. He knew what he would do. The road home followed a fence line past short grass and a few scrubby bushes. Crickets sang. A small owl called from a post. When he reached his gate, he swung it open and closed it again, as he always did, careful and complete. He led the horse to its stall, brushed its coat with long strokes, and set out fresh hay. He moved through these tasks with the calm rhythm of a man who finds peace in doing one thing at a time. But his mind returned again and again to the girl's quiet words and her steady posture, and the way she had caught the boy's hat without making a fuss. In the house, he struck a match and lit the lamp. The room glowed warm. He crossed to the spare room and opened the door. Dust motes drifted in the lamplight like tiny sparks. The bed was made, but the quilt looked a bit thin for a cool night. He fetched a thicker one from a cedar chest and spread it smooth, tucking in the corners. He set a pitcher of water on the washstand and laid a folded towel beside it. On a small shelf, he placed a worn but clean book, the kind a person might lean over at night, sounding out simple words, tracing lines with a finger, smiling when the shape of the sentences began to make sense. He did not know if she could read. It did not matter. If she could, the book would be a comfort. If she could not, he would teach her, slow and patient. He checked the kitchen, too. He had flour, beans, coffee, and the last of the summer peaches in a jar. He set a small pot on the stove and measured out oats for the morning. That way, when dawn came, there would be warm porridge ready and no need for many words at first. Back at the door, he paused and listened to the quiet house. It felt less empty already, as if a soft breeze had moved through and settled there. Before sleeping, Samuel stepped out onto the porch. The night was cool and still. He looked toward the dark line of the town in the distance and thought of the girl resting on the chapel step. He spoke softly, not to anyone in particular, but to the night itself. "Tomorrow," he said, steady and sure. "Tomorrow I will ask." He did not plan speeches. He did not gather rules. He trusted simple truth and plain promises. He would ride in, greet her with respect, and tell her what he could offer. A safe home, honest work, a fair share of meals, and a place at the table as long as she wished to stay. He felt certain that was the right thing. He felt at peace. Samuel stopped a few steps from the little wall where Nayeli was folding her blanket. The new day was gentle. Light rested on the roofs, and a bird tried a few notes from a fence post. He tipped his hat and spoke in a calm voice, each word simple, steady, and clear. He said he had seen her kindness the night before. He said he had a ranch a few miles south, a spare room, and honest work. He said she would have a place at his table and a fair share of food and pay. He added that she could stay as long as she wished, and if one day she chose to leave, there would be no anger, only a handshake and good wishes. He called her by her name, Nayeli, because he had asked Mrs. Parker and then remembered it with care. Nayeli listened without moving. She searched his face for hidden edges, but found none. He did not push. He did not hurry. He only waited, letting the quiet hold them both for a moment. She nodded slowly, She asked simple questions: what the work was, where she would sleep, whether there were others at the ranch. He answered each one plainly. Fences to mend, horses to brush, a small garden to tend, meals to cook together when they could. The room had a window that faced the morning sun. There were no other hands that week, though neighbors sometimes came by for shared tasks. When he finished, the day had grown a little brighter, and the two of them stood in a circle of soft light. She said yes. Not a loud yes, not a yes with a shout, but a yes in the shape of a breath that had been held too long and now could rest. He smiled once, a quiet, grateful smile, and held the reins of his horse so she could step up behind the saddle. Before they left, she walked to Mrs. Parker's store and tapped on the door. When Mrs. Parker answered, hair still in a sleep scarf and laughter in her eyes, Nayeli told her about the offer. Mrs. Parker nodded, looked at Samuel with a careful gaze, and seemed satisfied. She packed a small bag of biscuits and a twist of tea leaves as a gift for their ride. Then she pressed Nayeli's hands and said, "Come by when you can." They rode out of town with the sun on their backs and the fresh morning lifting their spirits. The horse moved in a smooth rhythm that made the miles pass softly. As they reached the line of cottonwoods, a small breeze set the leaves to whispering. The ranch came into view, a sturdy house with a porch, a red barn with a clean roof, a corral where two horses flicked their tails, and a few chickens strutting like they owned the yard. For a long moment, Nayeli just looked. The place felt like a complete sentence, each part in its right spot. It did not shine or boast. It simply was, and that felt safe. Samuel led the horse to the hitching post and helped her down. He showed her the spare room just as he had described. The bed was made with a thick quilt. The washstand held a pitcher and towel, and a small book waited on the shelf. The window caught the morning light and the floorboards were clean. She rested her bundle on the chair and spread her fingers over the quilt as if feeling the shape of the day. He left her a little time to settle, then called from the kitchen that porridge was ready if she wished to eat. They shared their first breakfast with quiet sentences and simple smiles. He poured coffee. She chose tea. He passed the jar of peaches and she took only a little, careful not to take more than her share. He told her the plan for the day, a look at the pasture fence, a sweep of the porch, oats to spread for the chickens, and a visit to the garden to see what needed water. She listened, added that she could scrub the stovetop and polish the lamp glass. He agreed. They were not trying to impress one another. They were simply finding their pace. Work began, and with it came a soft, steady kind of joy. He showed her where he kept the tools and how the gate latch liked to stick unless you lifted it just so. She taught him a quick way to braid old twine into a neat cord to hang onions. He moved with the ease of habit. She matched his steps, watching, learning, asking when a question rose and then trying it herself. When something was heavy, he carried it. When something was delicate, she handled it. And when something needed 4 hands, they did it together. Trust began to grow the way morning light grows, almost without being noticed, until suddenly everything looks clear. The first week passed in this new rhythm. In the afternoons, when the sun stretched long and the heat softened the ground, they would stop a little early to drink water under the cottonwoods. He would tip his hat back and tell a short plain story about a horse that once learned to open the barn door with its lips. She would smile and answer with a song from her childhood, low and sweet, the kind of melody that walks beside a person like a friend. He leaned in as if listening to the wind itself. She watched the lines of his face ease. At night, after the dishes were washed and the porch was swept, Samuel would bring out the small book from the spare room. He asked, gentle as a feather, if she wished to read together. She nodded, a little shy, and took the book with both hands. Some words she knew, like bread and horse and sun. Some words were new. He pointed with a pencil and waited while she sounded them out. He did not rush. He praised her steady progress. In turn, she showed him a few words in her language, teaching him how the vowels opened and the consonants hummed. They both stumbled and both laughed, and the room felt full. Not everything on the ranch was easy. One afternoon, a gusty wind came up and pushed grit across the yard. The gate banged. A bucket rolled. The sky turned the color of pale flour and the air smelled like dry earth. Samuel tied things down and checked the animals. Nayeli hurried to close the windows and gather the clean laundry off the line. They moved without panic, just quick and sure, and when the wind settled, they looked around at the small mess and smiled. Nothing was broken. All could be set right. They worked side by side until the yard was neat again. Afterward, Samuel set a pot of beans on the stove. and Nayeli placed a square of cornbread on each plate. They ate with the kind of hunger that comes from good effort. The day ended in peace. On market day, they rode to town with a crate of eggs and a few jars of preserves. People noticed them arrive together and share a tie for the horse. A few neighbors watched with curious eyes. One or two whispered. Most simply nodded, surprised at first and then settled. Mrs. Parker waved, delighted to see them, and made a point of asking Nayeli for help choosing a ribbon for a gift box. The simple kindness mattered. It turned a corner in the room. By noon, 2 other women approached Nayeli to ask whether she might teach them the braid she used for cords. She showed them patiently, and their fingers, though clumsy at first, learned the pattern. Samuel saw this and felt a quiet lift in his chest. He bought flour and sugar, then added a new kettle to the basket, saying the old one had a loose handle and this one would be safer. They rode back with the sun in their faces, and the road felt shorter than before. As the weeks turned into months, their days filled with small projects that grew into visible change. They painted the porch rail a soft, clean color. They planted mint and sage near the kitchen door. They laid flat stones to make a tidy walk from the gate to the steps. Visitors began to notice the difference. "Your place looks cheerful," the neighbor said, and Samuel nodded toward Nayeli. "We make a good team," the neighbor agreed. One evening, a gentle surprise arrived. A mare in the corral, round with new life, gave birth to a small, healthy foal just as the stars came out. There was no trouble, no fear, only the quiet wonder of new steps taken on long legs that bent like willow branches. The little foal blinked and leaned into its mother. Samuel and Nayeli kept a respectful distance, speaking softly so as not to startle. They watched until the foal stood steady and took a few careful sips of milk. Then they walked back to the house in happy silence, both of them carrying a warm feeling that stayed the whole night. Reading lessons grew richer. Nayeli soon turned pages without pause. She started to write lists for the market and small notes for the week. Samuel in turn practiced the words she taught him, surprising her by using one correctly at breakfast and making her laugh with delight. On Sundays after chores, they would sometimes sit with pencils and paper and write short lines about the day. "The sky was clear," she wrote once. "The fence stands strong," he wrote. They pinned the notes by the door like tiny flags of progress. There were moments of tender honesty, too. One chilly morning, as steam rose from their cups, Samuel spoke of the thin days after he lost his old life, the way the house had felt too quiet, and the way work had been the rope he held to pull himself forward. He did not give many details. He did not need to. She understood. Later, she told him about crossings and partings, about how sometimes a person keeps moving because stopping would mean feeling too much. She did not linger on sorrow. She simply let him see the map of her journey. When they finished speaking, they went to feed the hens, and their steps matched as if they had always walked together.